Jeff Bezos is viewed by as many as the richest person to have ever walked the earth. However, there are many billionaires and even trillionaires that have come before him. That being said, it can be challenging to estimate the wealth of someone who was born in the 1400s or someone who owned a kingdom. But using the opinions of several different experts, a pretty clear list can be compiled. Number 5. John D. Rockefeller, $400 billion. Good old Jeff may be the most wealthy American right now, but he's got a long way to go to beat the wealthiest American of all time. John D. Rockefeller. That name should sound familiar to you. The oil tycoon had a fortune of around $400 billion. He founded the Standard Oil Company in 1870, which began to skyrocket in value shortly after. At one point in time, Standard Oil Company controlled 90% of the oil in the United States. His personal wealth became so enormous that his fortune was 2% of the national economy. With all his money, Rockefeller lived an incredibly comfortable life. He owned houses across the United States. Most notably, he owned Kikuit, a 40-home room with views of New York City. The home took 6 years to complete and featured collections of Chinese ceramics and 20th century art. But the Kikuit home was just the beginning. The home was set on an estate that would come to be known as the Pocantico Estate. The estate covered 3,510 acres and included 75 houses, 70 roads, and 9-hole reversible golf course, outdoor swimming pools, several tennis courts, a full-sized bowling alley, billiard halls, and its own farm and gardens. Rockefeller wasn't well liked by much of the public, but as he aged, he really stepped his philanthropy game up. He donated 10% of his income yearly to charity. Number 4. Akbar I. Akbar I owned a massive empire in the 1500s, and he had quite a fortune too, estimated to have been around $500 billion, though some estimates say he was worth even more. As a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, he had ruling and conquering in his blood. He worked hard from the moment he took the throne to conquer as much territory as possible, tripling it in the size by the end of his rule. Known as the Mughal Empire, his reign stretched across India all the way into northern Afghanistan. He was most known for his religious tolerance, which was most unheard of in the time. Although he was Muslim, many of his closest advisors and the city leaders were Hindu. He took an active role in uniting the two religions and allowing individuals the freedom to choose. He was known for helping translate Hindu literature, and he even took an active role in Hindu festivals. Little is known about how his wealth was spent, but it is known that he had a lot of it. His empire controlled 25% of the world's GDP for years. His palace was said to have exquisite carvings, wall paintings, and extremely rare furniture. Number 3. Augustus Caesar. Julius Caesar may be more well known, but his heir, Augustus Caesar, was the rich one. He is the only confirmed trillionaire in history, owning a fifth of the wealth of the Roman Empire, which accounted for 30% of the world's GDP at the time. Most experts agree his fortune hovered around $4.3 trillion. On top of the wealth his position as emperor brought, much of his fortune came from inheritance. He inherited 75% of Julius Caesar's wealth, and while no one knows exactly how much that is, Julius was known to have left 300 sesterces to every Roman citizen upon his death. At the time, 300 sesterces was worth 4 months' wages, and that barely put a dent in his finances. But it wasn't just Julius who gave Augustus money. Several wealthy families were known to leave part of their estate to the emperor, hoping it would bring political safety to their own children. During his 40-year affluent reign, he doubles the size of the Roman Empire. He founded a standing army, police and fire services, a courier system, and roads, effectively bringing Rome into the modern age. During his life, he lived in a palace now known as the House of Augustus. The House of Augustus featured entire rooms dedicated to art and weapons. Mosaics were said to cover every floor, and frescoes were said to cover every wall. Upon his death, one of the last recorded things he said was, "I found Rome of clay. I leave it to you of marble." Indeed, his rule ushered in a 200-year era of peace and prosperity in the empire. Number 2. Shizong of Song. The runner-up for the most wealthy person in history is also one of the most mysterious on our list. Emperor Shizong of Song reigned from 1067 to 1085. Lucky for him, this was during an extremely affluent and prosperous era of China. They were the top makers of bronzeware in the world, and farmers were granted the rights to own became their own property. The production of rice skyrocketed and became a staple of the economy, making them a commercial superpower. In addition to this, gunpowder, printing, and magnetic compasses were invented during this time. The Song dynasty was able to create the world's first paper money and also formed the world's first navy. The navy allowed them to defend their trade routes, which protected their products. With all this innovation, Emperor Shenzong controlled 30% of the global GDP, and with a highly centralized economy, Shenzong had immense control over the money. His wealth has been called immeasurable. Experts know it is trillions of dollars, but it's hard to pin down an exact amount. Much of his financial status is attributed to the fact that he formed and increased tax collection hundreds of years ahead of European governments. But even with his wealth, Shenzong was known for being fairly giving. He is viewed as a forerunner of the modern welfare system. His policies actively improve the situations of the unemployed, the homeless, and the peasants. Number 1. The most wealthy person in the history of the world may be someone you've never heard of, but after this, you won't forget him. Mansa Musa controlled a fortune so vast, so extravagant, that modern historians cannot even fathom how much he truly had. He rode across Africa on zebras, carrying thousands of pounds of gold, and that was the equivalent of spare change to him. He became the ruler of the Mali Empire in the early 1300s, when his predecessor went missing, trying to find the end of the Atlantic Ocean. It's too bad his predecessor couldn't just stick to land, because he would have had a pretty incredible life. During Mansa Musa's rule, Europe was struggling immensely. Things like the Great Famine, Civil War, and a fun little thing called Black Death brought all the kingdoms of Europe to its knees. But Mali was doing fantastic. It was the world's largest producers of gold and salt, which were the two most important products at the time. Mansa Musa conquered 24 cities and their surrounding districts within the first few years of his rule, yet he remained distant from the rest of the world. Even in Egypt and the Middle East, little was known about him. But that all changed when Mansa Musa began his journey to Mecca. As a Muslim, the pilgrimage was an important part of his religion, but when you have that kind of money, you don't exactly have to rough it. His voyage to Mecca covered 4,000 miles, and he didn't go at it alone. He brought tens of thousands of soldiers, slaves, and heralds. Every single person wore Persian silk and carried gold staffs. The camels and horses carried hundreds of pounds of gold. There were at least 80 camels that carried between 50 to 300 pounds each. As he journeyed through Africa, he was a spectacle for all to see. He often spent frivolously in cities and even gave gold as gifts. Upon hearing he was approaching Cairo, Al-Nasir, the Sultan, ordered him to visit his palace. Mansa Musa refused, but finally agreed to go upon Al-Nasir's constant insistence. There was a moment of tension with Mansa Musa refused to kiss Al-Nasir's feet, which was a common gesture of respect at the time. He eventually conceded, and Al-Nasir offered him lodging for the night. His time in Cairo was one few could forget, but by the time he left, the streets were covered in gold, and the people were basking in the fortune he had given them. But unfortunately, giving the fortune became a problem. His gifts depreciated the value of metal, and it would take 12 years for the city of Cairo, Medina, and Mecca to financially recover. It is said on his long journey to Mecca that he funded a mosque being built every single Friday. Upon arriving in Mecca, he turned himself to his religion and studies for days at a time. When he returned home, he got to working on building palaces, mosques, and universities throughout his empire. He created Sankor Madrasa, a leading center and university. The university housed 1 million manuscripts, rivaling even that of the Library of Alexandria. Unfortunately, soon after Mansa Musa's death, the Empire of Mali began to fall. Constant civil war began to weaken the country, and its ability to trade began to diminish. By the 1600s, Mali was being invaded by European cities to exploit its resources, and the rest is history. So you think Jeff Bezos will pass them? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Oh, and turn on post notifications.